Alright fellas, here we are with issue 3 of Shattered Glass. This one is a good one, so let's go ahead and dive straight into this, right? So this starts with Megatron and Starscream entering the city, and we have a lot of dialogue and backstory with this issue, but we'll get to that. But right now they are in Gold City trying their best to stay undercover, as Gold City, if you guys remember, is a Autobot stronghold, and we have Megatron telling Starscream that he's not paranoid, but it is pretty obvious that the people in Gold City do know they are here and who they are. And considering Gold City is filled with nothing but bounty hunters, it's pretty much a ticking time bomb waiting to happen and see which bounty hunter will try and take them down first. So Megatron's plan is to go here and see if any remaining Decepticons exist or are around in Gold City, because now Starscream is essentially a package that needs to be protected at all costs, because we found out last issue that he may be the only one who can wake the Titans and take back the fight with the Autobots. But we see that other Decepticons have found him, and it's Ravage, and I think Rumble in the background. But they start to lead Starscream and Megatron, and we see it's all of Soundwave's Recordicons leading to them. And we have a nice reunion with Ravage and Megatron, and Ravage is surprised to hear that Megatron was still alive, and the same with Starscream. And we learn to find out that the room they are being led to is a secret communications room ran by Soundwave, who looks amazing here. I really dig his design here. And we see Soundwave is basically the communicator for the Decepticons here, making sure that no Decepticons out there and are left alone and led to refuge or grouped up to a certain degree, which is awesome. It's cool that Soundwave, of all the people, in this universe, is kind of like the one man they can count on. I think it's really cool. To me, like, Soundwave is kind of like the morale officer, and I think it's really cool that he's doing his best to unite the Decepticons together. And we see here he tells Starscream he doesn't want to recruit Decepticons who have severe trauma, and calls them in when they are on the brink of a meltdown. And Starscream tells him that he wouldn't expect or want him to do all that, but we see Soundwave tell him, as a personal gift to Starscream's thing, he's called all the Seekers out to them to come to Starscream's aid and help him out, which is really cool because the Seekers in Shattered Glass are really awesome. And we see here that Soundwave is basically working double overtime as the communication specialist for the Decepticons, which Starscream recognizes and lets him know that he doesn't have to work so hard, and if he overworks himself, who else will take the mantle as the communication specialist? Which to Soundwave's response was just, it's been too many cycles to count, and he couldn't risk not being there when someone needed him, and doesn't want to be responsible if any soldiers hit rock bottom, and if he's not there, which again, very cool that this version of Soundwave is this morale guy. I think it's really cool. But what we get here next is a flashback of Starscream and Jetfire back before the war started, and this is the same sequence of events we saw last issue with Megatron and Prowl, but from the perspective of Starscream and Jetfire. And while Starscream is asking Jetfire, he sees the injustice that is happening, and Jetfire is just he just brushes it off, and I want you guys to remember how he brushes things off like this. But he initially ignores all of what Starscream is saying. At first, saying minors like Megatron really don't make a difference. And when Starscream asks him if he really means this, Jetfire backpedals a bit and just says, no, he doesn't, and he's exhausted. And this is very important. So I want you guys to remember their goal here, which is to wake up Metroplex and discover old Cybertronian history. So be mindful of everything that's happening here between Starscream and Jetfire's back and forth, and how Jetfire kind of backpedals a bit, because at this very moment their goal is to wake up Metroplex and discover old Cybertronian history, and they seem to be the only ones who know at least how to a certain degree. But Jetfire brushes off this comment, saying he doesn't really mean what he said, and that the whole struggle here is for them to have the funding to continue more of their project of waking the Titans and discovering their old Cybertronian history. So for them, it seems like no one really wants to give them the night of day except one person, and it's one of my favorite characters in Shattered Glass, our boy Orion Pax. And we see Jetfire doing most of the pitching the idea here to Orion Pax, and it's essentially them trying to get funding by any means, even if it's from someone corrupt like Orion Pax. And we know he's corrupt from last issue, but we do see Orion agree and basically say, you will get your funding if you get results, which they both agree to. But here's the catch. Orion tells him that one issue is not everyone is built to understand what they are doing and the project that they are currently doing. And with Starscream asking Orion exactly who would be reporting their research to Orion, Orion kind of just stares back at him and asks him, does it really matter who? Which is just already completely shady, because they are essentially digging up this info and trying to wake up Metroplex, but the data they find, only Orion wants to know what it is and if it should be in the public or not, which Starscream disagreed with. And yeah, this is pretty shady because essentially anything they dig up, Orion Pax gets to control what's public and what's not public. So we see Starscream walk out of the room and we cut back to the present for a little bit as Megatron and Starscream are at this club of some kind, and it's Starscream and Megatron going over the plan again. And if you guys can't pick up already, literally everyone in this room knows they are Decepticons, and they're just waiting for the right moment to strike, which when Starscream starts to pick this up, Megatron was already 2 steps ahead and knew they were being spied on. We then see Eject transform, and Megatron completely throws the table over, but before we see who's there waiting for them, we go back to another flashback of Jetfire and Starscream. And this flashback is important because just like the ambush at the club they were at, Starscream comments how he can never see what is happening in front of him, which is exactly what happens in this flashback, because we see that they got the funding to do their research on Metroplex and learn about Titans, which we see, you know, Starscream is very happy and being able to essentially do his dream job. And we see Jetfire just kind of like, whatever. And you'll see why he's like that. But they start getting to work on their research and trying to wake up Metroplex because, again, their theory is that he isn't necessarily dead or alive, but kind of in a comatose state to a certain degree. It's kind of hard to explain, almost if he's like mute. So they got to figure out how they can like speak to him and get all the data he has. And because in this universe, the Titans are a lot older, so that's why they're trying to wake the Titans and, you know, wake up Metroplex and decode all what he can say, because there's no, you know, Titan speakers, at least in the story right now. So that's why they're trying to learn about their old Cybertronian history. It's pretty cool. And we see in the next page how happy and excited Starscream is about doing this, and we see Jetfire start to get a little happy because even Jetfire calls him out for being a little grumpy. And when Jetfire asks if he's been grumpy, Starscream tells him he understands why he's upset, because they've had a lot of trouble for anyone trying to listen to them and give them funding for this project, and says soon even brutes like Orion Pax will see why everyone needs access to their history and learning more about them and their history. But we see Jetfire start to worry that if translating Metroplex's speech will take longer than they think, and starts to worry about them running out of funding, which Starscream gets annoyed by this and tells Jetfire they aren't doing this conversation again, and refuses to work with someone corrupt like Orion Pax. But we come back to the present and we have Shatterglass Blaster, who just walks in. And let me say real quick how awesome Blaster looks here. I don't think Blaster's ever had a bad design. Comment down below if he has. I really doubt it. But we see Blaster and Starscream getting ready to fight, and with Starscream getting ready to pull his swords out, we see a full-on fight go down. But here's the thing. Blaster mentions that whoever brings them the Gold City HQ, they will get double the price, so they can't really fight to kill here. It's more a fight to knock him out. So really, Megatron and Starscream have the upper hand here in this fight, because they can just, you know, fight to kill, but the Autobots, they can't. They have to bring him in the HQ. And because of that rule, we literally see in the next page Megatron and Starscream get the upper hand like it's nothing. We see Megatron grab one of the Autobots and throws him right at Starscream, and Starscream just slices him in half, which is just so freaking cool. But we see in the next page Blaster starts to get the upper hand in this fight and uses his sound abilities from his knees, sending waves to Starscream and knocking him down. And we see Megatron grab a hold of Blaster and tell Starscream to run and leave, because if Starscream gets captured, then this whole plan is ruined. This whole game plan is done. And that's exactly what we see here as Starscream runs, leaving Megatron behind. As Starscream starts to freak out, calling himself stupid for abandoning Megatron. Which, why we see here, he comments himself saying he's so tired of being alone, which then we cut back to another flashback of Jetfire and Starscream, of Jetfire talking to Orion and his council of Autobots, talking about how they have a theory of communicating with Metroplex with a device, and that Starscream will hook himself up to it. And we see one of the council members interrupt Jetfire, calling Starscream a Decepticon, and we learn to find out Starscream was listening to this whole conversation the entire time, and gets pulled in by Bumblebee and Prowl, and they drag him into the room and are all staring down Starscream. And Prowl makes a comment saying he's not an Autobot, and if he's not an Autobot, then he's the Decepticon, which we then see Jetfire start to panic and tells him that he isn't a Decepticon, and looks to Orion and tells him that he's with him and he wouldn't cross the line of being a Decepticon, which then Jetfire looks to Starscream to have him tell him that he isn't one, which Starscream starts to say he isn't a Decepticon, as Decepticons are fighters fighting against the Autobots, taking our work and destroying what they can't control. And says, you want to talk about trust when you're okay with that? I trusted in who we are and who we should be. So I may not be a Decepticon, but I am no Autobot. And you, Jetfire, turn your back on us all. Which then leaves Jetfire sucker punching the Seeker, which leaves Starscream commenting, saying he didn't feel the punch since he was already melted to the core with Jetfire's betrayal. And we see Starscream run from the council and flies back to the research facility and destroys everything. literally everything him and Jetfire have been working on, and starts to download most stuff needed to communicate with Metroplex onto himself. But with the Autobots arriving, he had to leave and destroy everything else. And he starts to self-reflect here, wondering if the Decepticons would have won the war if he hadn't acted like an Autobot that day and destroyed everything he couldn't control. And with the data upload being interrupted, his attempt at bringing the work him and Jetfire worked so hard to get, binding it to him, now being corrupted, and the whole facility being a mess. So Starscream now is at this point and goes on to say he's been accused of being melodramatic many times in his life, but this time he believes he's earned the right to his misery. But we learn to find out that Starscream returned to Metroplex a few cycles ago and essentially tried rehooking himself up to Metroplex, and it took him untold cycles, but finally he figured out ways to bridge the gap between himself and Metroplex, which then we see he starts to merge with Metroplex. And he goes on to say every part of him screams in agony, and every part of him sang in harmony with the words of a Titan, and everything that he believed in and everything they wanted to take from Cybertron was now in Starscream's mind and body. But we see Starscream get knocked out here and wonders if it's the Seekers that Soundwave called in for him, but no, it's not. And Starscream comments saying that flight pattern and footsteps are too familiar, which then we see him being woken up by someone, and that someone goes to Starscream and says it's Megatron's mouthpiece, and tells Starscream he forgot how ridiculous he looks. Which we see Jetfire and GOLDBUG appear, and GOLDBUG telling Jetfire that since they found him like this, he won't have to pay Jetfire or Blaster or any other bounty hunter, which Jetfire says he doesn't do this for the money, which we see our boy GOLDBUG in full effect saying, why bother when we got a way bigger prize right here? And that's how this one ends, fellas. Oh, so good. Yeah, we're back with Shattered Glass, man. We're back. I promise we're going to finish the story out, all right? I promise. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this issue down below. I know this one was a lot more dialogue heavy, but it's good story building for what's to come next. But leave a like and sub if you're new, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.